Hey guys, it's Siege here. As you know, TC and I are brand new to this podcast game and are still learning the ropes. We noticed some audio issues this episode and wanted to let you know that we noticed it, we're working on it, and hope you enjoy the episode nonetheless. Here it goes.
Hello, and welcome to Bruh Meets World.
When it's Bruh Meets World.
Your Boy Meets World fan cast. I'm Siege.
And I'm TC.
And are you... Okay, so we kind of hit on this a little bit, but this is like you and I diving back into it after a while from watching the episode, which is unusual for us.
Yeah, it's been a little while since we've seen this episode, so I'm hoping that we kind of hit the points we want. I think we'll be okay. I think we'll be good.
Let's go into the tell me about it from there, because I'm really excited to talk about this episode.
So this is episode 3 of season 1.
Yes, Father Knows Less.
Father Knows Less, yes.
And the Hulu description is Corey fails a test at school after staying up late with his dad. And where are you at with that?
I think that's pretty accurate. I think that obviously the story is about more than that, but for a one sentence description, I think it does fine. Better than the last episodes. Yeah,
it's way better than the last episode. As a matter of fact, I re-listened to our last episode and I was like, it was way off that description.
It wasn't even close.
This one actually does summarize it pretty well. So, in the opening scene of Father Knows Less, Corey and Alan are making sandwiches. And you don't
Well, they're making ridiculous sandwiches. They're making like an entire package of bologna in between 2 pieces of bread sandwiches.
Exactly. I thought about that. I was like, this is absurd, but it's kind of like the sitcom absurdity, but at the exact same
time. Did you eat bologna this much as a kid?
I was going to bring this up, and I love that you did. I hated bologna. I mean, hated bologna.
It's not good.
I remember I tell this joke or this story very often. When I was younger, my mom did like a road trip, and she was like, instead of like stopping, I'm just going to buy food. And she bought bologna, and I was like, I will not eat that. And she was like, well, this is all that there is going to be. So if you don't eat it, you won't eat. Guess who didn't eat? I was completely proud of it because I ate bologna. But then later on, I found out that I had this pork allergy. So maybe that was all that was
possibly. But yeah, bologna for me just seems real 90s for whatever reason. I don't feel like it's a sandwich that like lived past my childhood. And maybe that's just because only children eat it, but
you're right.
For me, it just seems very distinct to that decade.
I don't even think that like we don't even show like college kids eating bologna anymore. Like bologna's
it's just not a thing you hear anymore.
Yeah, bologna was very 90s. Oh, did you ever have that? I didn't eat it, but do you
mean
the red
string around the bologna? Yes, man. That's gummit bologna.
Gummit. Oh, wow.
Bologna.
Wow. Okay. So stop. I'm not trying to shame anyone's bologna choices. Corey kind of mimics everything that Alan is doing this while they're making the sandwich as well. Like, you know.
Yeah, they have their monster bologna sandwich. They're both pouring mustard on it. And they're like, oh, even they put it in the lunch bag and they're like, oh, the bag feels light.
Yeah,
and so they dump a bunch of chips in it.
Which I like. That's also a very a TV trope of someone who eats a lot. It's like they take food crafting so seriously. You know, it's just kind of like it's missing something. And
I feel like I've seen on several sitcoms, like people like try to prepare like a really good sandwich. Like I feel like on Fresh Prince, I've seen it. On Family Matters, I've seen it. On just a few different shows. And then like for whatever reason, like typically the trope is their sandwich experience gets ruined for whatever reason. Like someone tries to eat the sandwich or there's a noise where they can't enjoy it. It's a very sitcom thing to do.
You know, I'm not gonna lie. A good sandwich is maybe one of those simple pleasures in life that is just underrated. Like a really,
we can all relate to it.
Yeah. A really good sandwich, man. Like a Publix sub. You know,
Pub Sub. Y'all up north and up west don't even know about Pub Sub.
Yeah, shout out to Publix subs, man. But okay, yeah, we go back there and Oh, so you mentioned it earlier, and I just wanted to note this. They pour the whole bag of chips into the paper bag.
They're lunch bags.
And
they
I'm
have a brown paper lunch bag. Yeah.
I'm like, does this family know how paper bags work? Like, apparently, no one in the Matthews family.
Well, I will say this, that Alan has a family-sized bag of potato chips, and Corey has a single-serving bag of potato chips, which I thought was cute. But in the last episode, they were just talking about how, like, middle class they were and how, like, they just don't really have tons of money. But Alan seems to be wasting an entire bag of potato chips.
Well, he also works at the market. So for all we know, those chips were, like, on sale.
he got the hookup on the chips. Yeah. Okay, so food-wise, they're covered.
Yeah, they're good. They're good as fun. And then enters Amy, and Amy comes in. And, you know, it's like, again, there was this father-son little moment of, like, the little boy mimicking everything that his dad does. In comes Amy, in comes mom to like disrupt the fun, as you know, again in this father-son moment. And she's like, you know, she throws in an apple to make sure they're eating well, and we kind of see what this whole evening is about. Apparently,
yeah. Well, they have that joke of just like Corey's like, "Oh, come on, mom, we want manly food," and then she puts the apple in the bag and says, "Come on, Core, momly food."
Yeah, again, it's very cheesy, but I like it. I think this episode is going to be another one kind of off the backs of what we discussed in the previous episode, where it's like we're going to be very family centric. It's very kind of ABC family-ish, but I feel it's also a little bit more in line with the Boy Meets World we're familiar with.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely feel that this storyline is more of a first season storyline, but I think that when we get into the conflict of just like Feeney versus Alan and their whole thing, that feels very true to the show.
Yeah, that's what I mean by that. So we find out here that they're going to see the Blue Angels, and this is some father-son bonding, and we get the little bit. Go ahead.
Well, Morgan asks if she can go, and then Corey straight out says no.
Yeah. Which, again, I think I even got that because, you know, Morgan wanting to... When I looked at this, I immediately was like, oh, father-son bonding, even before I knew that they were doing this Blue Angels trip. And Morgan wanting to come would totally ruin that. And I didn't even know where we were going with this, but it kind of shows really soon that this is a plan that's not really... you know, gonna work itself out. But I do love the fact that Morgan wants to come, and this being a show where Morgan's so encouraged to express herself. I also love how Corey's like, you know, she wants to be involved, and like 5 seconds later, she's just gone.
And then she disappears when they look for her again. But I think that speaks more to what Morgan is. She comes in, she says her one-liners, and then she disappears until one day she never comes back.
Also very true. All right, so I like this little background story because there's a knock at the door. Amy goes to answer the door, and we see Eric in the living room apologizing to Heather.
The same girl from the first episode.
Exactly.
So there's some continuity there. I appreciate that.
I was going to say, I love this little background storyline with Eric and Heather. Like, I look forward to seeing when it goes awry because, you know, one day we're just not going to hear from Heather anymore. But
of course.
3 episodes in.
Eric's on the phone with Heather talking about, like, hey, like, sorry I sucked your neck or something.
Yeah, he's like, if you wear a turtleneck, no one will know, which gives us kind of the audience, we know what happened. And Corey even looks at his mom and is like, I sucked a neck. I'm a teen.
Yeah.
It's like, forgive me for living out loud. But he opened the door, and it's Leonard Spinelli. So
we meet Lenny, who is, I believe, the only coworker of Alan's that we ever meet up until he leaves the grocery store.
Correct. I mean, again, you would know way better than me, but like I think that's the case.
Yeah, because I think that's the only time we meet a coworker.
What do you think about Lenny? Like, what are your first?
Oh man, I think Lenny is Again, a very classic TGIF trope is to have an annoying neighbor type. I think that they were still trying to figure out what direction where they wanted to go with the show. And so Lenny feels like something I'd see on the Step by Step. It feels like something I'd see on A Family Matters. It doesn't feel like something that is true to what Boy Meets World ultimately becomes.
Exactly. There's the exchange goes, I'm Mr. Matthews' assistant manager. Lenny, I know you've been here 20 times. Lenny, I'm not sure if I make an impression on people. Yeah, you do.
Can I just say, I actually think Lenny introducing himself to everyone again every time he sees them is a pretty funny joke.
It's a good joke, and they do it with every single character. Lenny does it with we will see Lenny reintroduce himself to every single character.
And when he does it to Corey and Morgan, that's when it's cute, and that's when it's funny.
Yeah, but what I saw it as is a great bit of meta commentary, because it is one of those things where it's why would he answer the door and be like, "Hi, I'm the assistant manager," and I feel like that was Michael Jacobs' way of being no, he just says that to everyone. He just doesn't know if people remember him.
Oh, so it wasn't really a joke. It was just a lazy way to give us exposition.
Exactly. That's exactly how I see it. But yeah, he said he's tried calling repeatedly. But as we can see, Eric was on the phone, which kind of explains why he wasn't able to get through. And again, he mentions that, call waiting is just pennies a day. But the fact that they don't have call waiting ties back into what we were talking earlier about them being a family that's just kind of at the edge of their means.
Sure. Yeah, for sure. The explanation for why Lenny needs to pull Alan away from this event is so ridiculous and absurd. If I remember this correctly, it has to do with a spilling of Puree water bottles.
Perrier. The bottles of Perrier above the produce fell, and there was a tidal wave down aisle 6. I made note of that.
Aisle 6 is where the Alka-Seltzer
is, yeah. So it's this whole fizzy mess that they have to deal with.
Something you would see in a cartoon. Nothing that would have happened in real life. That's just a wild... I thought, oh, maybe there was a fire, which eventually, sure, we'll get to that.
Yeah.
But there should have just been a better excuse than, they're basically hey, the soda spilled all over the Pop Rocks. Ha ha ha.
Yeah, that is essentially what they're saying. It's a Pop Rocks thing. But what I really, really enjoyed about this piece, besides the fact that it's just absurd, is it does kind of set up this zany reason for Alan to be pulled away. And so Alan has to go, and Corey says, I'm not spending enough time with my dad. If you leave now, I'll start taking ballet lessons. And then that's when we get into this part that, of course...
that felt real, 90s when I heard that. I was like, wow, we just put that on TV now.
Yeah. It's if you do it now, I'll start taking ballet lessons. And Alan goes to leave, and Corey does this little ballet stance to kind of threaten him, if you're not around, I'll be sissified, is essentially what he's
yeah. This is a pre-woke life, guys. This is I don't know when America got woke, but it was
not during this episode. It was after this. I like that. All right, and then that's our opening scene, and that's kind of how we set up.
I will just say that, I know that there's going to be a few times when we're going to run into instances like this, and I'm okay to turn a blind eye. I do understand that, there's only so much we can ask of people who didn't really know. I don't know. It's a weird thing.
I do it all the time. I'll look at shows set in 2007, and they're really homophobic, or they'll have some things, and you're ooh, we thought so differently back then. And it was
or just sexism was really how you were saying about How I Met Your Mother. I can't even watch it anymore. It was just
You're right. There's plenty of times watching How I Met Your Mother or just other shows, and you're maybe we shouldn't do this. Maybe this situation is kind of rapey, or
yeah.
So anyways, we'll forgive them for this slight mishap against masculinity. But anyway, after the opening scene, Alan comes back home from work, and he tries to wake up Corey to watch the Phillies no-hitter. And he asked Corey if he wants to come down and watch. Corey's like, "Are you new here?" "Of course I want to."
Yeah.
And he invites Eric, and Eric says, "I'm busy naked taking a test."
Yeah, I was trying to understand this. Was he in the middle of like a sexy dream?
No. It's a play on the typical little dream that you have where you're naked in class. It's like a nightmare, but like Eric's saying that he'd rather be doing that than whatever.
Yeah, but because he chose to rather be doing that is what made me think it was sexual in some way. But that's fine. Well,
yeah, I mean, honestly, we weren't there. That's again a podcast for another time. But they go downstairs, they watch the game, and there's a bunch of like grunt talk, and this is again.
Well, they immediately go back to what they were doing before, where they're eating these like monster bologna sandwiches, chowing down on chips and soda. Keep in mind, it's like past midnight at this point.
Yeah.
Like it's one thing for him to wake him up, but to like fill him up with bologna and soda, like I mean. Come on, Alan. What are you doing?
That's a very good point. I didn't even think about the fact that he's feeding him all this food late on top of which.
Yeah.
You're right. I wouldn't even eat like that unless I'm drunk. This late at night.
Just he has school the next day. Just like soda that late? I don't know.
Which leads to the whole don't tell mom. And I think almost anytime on TV someone says don't tell mom, mom's going to find out. And in real life, any situation where someone tells you don't tell mom is probably something you shouldn't be doing. I'm just going to put
It immediately, you as an audience member, you're like, oh, okay, so we're just waiting for this thing to
You're right. It's like, so mom's going to find out in like seconds.
And it just, I do understand that there's this thing of Alan going like, oh, I'm busy all the time with work, and I promised Corey I'd take him to this thing that I got pulled away from, so I'm trying to make it up to him. I know he would really appreciate seeing this Phillies game. The episode really kind of goes into the ethics of Alan's decision. Was it a good thing for him to wake Corey up, spend time with him or not? And I mean, I don't know how you really feel about it, but at this point in the episode, you are sympathetic to what Alan's doing.
Oh yeah, definitely. I was going to ask you, do you have anything like this where it's like because Corey and Alan bond over baseball, and as we mentioned in our first episode, baseball is kind of Corey's love interest at this point in time in the show. This is Corey's.
He's obsessed with it. Yeah.
Yeah. And you can see that it's something that him and his father also bond over. Do you and your dad have like anything that it's like your thing?
I mean, not really. I know that me and my mom would like every now and then she would like pull me out of school to like do something cool. And I do remember that and that being really awesome. Like, even if it was just like, we were leaving for Thanksgiving, but she would take me out of school like a few days early or something like that. Like, I did always remember that and appreciate doing that.
All right. See that's what I meant. Like, yeah. Do you have like a parent bonding like thing? Mine is like, my parents never like took me out of school to do things unless it, of course, like was for their schedule. But my dad and I, television, movies, like the Batman series and like all that other stuff to this day.
Yeah.
I'll just be like, oh, have you seen like this episode or have you seen this show? And that's kind of like how I connected with this storyline being like,
well, funny you say that because another thing me and my mom would do is we would watch TGIF every Friday. We would watch Boy Meets World. So this was part of our
This is part of your whole thing. But yeah, so of course, as we were saying, Alan says, don't tell mom. And then even Corey's like, mom's not in on this? This is like
yeah, he justfully feels weird about it. He should feel weird about it.
Yeah, very much. No, this is father-son bonding. Your mom can never know about this. And again, as we said, Amy is, of course, going to find out about it. And then Corey says something which is, kind of like that wholesome moment, which is that this is as good as watching those Navy planes any day.
Yeah, I thought that was a really sweet moment. And it really just showed that Corey, what Alan intended for Corey to feel is what he ended up feeling. So it's...
Exactly. It was about...
Stayed up late, but they had a moment that Corey's going to remember and cherish, and it's going to lead to them having a better relationship. So it's that ethics question. Was this a good decision or not?
Yeah, and it's about the quality time that Alan spends with Corey. And I think, something like the Blue Angels is like flashy and big and roaring, but just being able to spend like 30 minutes extra with your dad late night eating bologna sandwiches is just as cool.
Sure. And we definitely learned from the last episode that Alan is busy. That is something that we are learning as an audience, is that he's constantly having to do things either at home or at work, or having to go to work afterwards for whatever thing Lenny can't handle. He's constantly being pulled every which way. So it makes sense, even from the last episode, that Corey would feel he doesn't spend a lot of time with his dad. And so I think that this is a storyline that just makes sense within this dynamic that they've built.
Yeah. All right. So, of course, we end on this really sweet note, but the next scene, we're in school, Feeney's collecting tests, and...
Can I say something about this?
Yes.
When we're in the classroom the next day, we are in a different classroom set than the classroom that we had in the first episode, the pilot. And this is the classroom set that we keep for the remainder of the season. And in the final episode, when they have their goodbye to Mr. Feeney, this is also the set that they go to.
Oh, really? Is this I was going to say, I knew this set looks familiar, and this is definitely the area that is more what I think of when I think of a Mr. Feeney and the class.
This was Dream, Try, Do Good. This was this set.
Oh, all right. I like it.
Or at least a recreation of it, I'm sure.
Yeah. A recreation of it. And that's really fantastic. In this episode, we get a little bit of Minkus and the rest of the class. Again, we go back into it. I like it because, what is it? Feeney goes, Minkus, this assignment didn't include an essay, and but I'm happy that you included one. And Sean goes, suck up. Minkus goes, future plumber.
Well, what I love, too, is that Minkus is just such a better character than even Sean at this point, or whatever third seat kid, because he's the antagonist. He is the one who is making being a kid look easy, while Corey is confused and doesn't know how to go about doing anything, it seems correctly. So for Minkus just to be here's my test and I wrote extra answers, and I stayed up late too, and I feel fresh as a daisy, and it doesn't seem like there's any weakness to Minkus, and that highlights Corey's weaknesses.
I think it's funny because what I wanted to pull out here is, again, how secure Minkus is in his role as a nerd. He doesn't even back down for a second. Sean goes, suck up. Minkus immediately replies, future plumber. Minkus is thinking ahead. He's like, I may be on the bottom totem pole now, but one day you'll need me.
Yeah, he is very aware of just he just seems very driven. Yeah. He seems almost like Alex P. Keaton type of driven, very young, very precocious, knows what he wants to do with his life, and determined as how to get there.
Yeah. Also, you kind of mentioned it earlier, but this is the first episode we don't have a third seat kid.
No third seat kid. Well, I guess now that Minkus has been introduced, is there a reason to have a third seat kid?
No, not really. I mean, because the story works fine, and there's no real place for another character right now. You have
because we're not even introduced to Topanga until the next episode. So right now, it's really only Corey, Sean, and Minkus, which is I obviously worked better than any third seat kid.
Yeah. All right. So Feeney goes, this feels a C- short, which, by the way, mirrors what Alan said earlier about the chips. Remember just that feeling and the initial. And so this is kind of showing they're both experts.
Oh, yeah. Look at that coming full circle.
There's a little parallel. But Feeney goes, it feels a C- short, and he goes directly over to Corey, and Corey is sleeping.
He slept through the whole test.
Yeah. And Corey goes, how'd I do? And he goes, it feels like an A, or looks like an A. Oh, really? No, it looks like you put down an A. And
he's like, well, you gave one answer, which was wrong. So what grade do you think I'm going to give you? And he's like, does it start with the same letter as falafel?
That's where we get the classic Ben Savage delivery. Because he does it, he sells it. He sells it as great.
Yeah, and well, he goes on to be like, hey, Mr. Feeney, cut me some slack. I was up past midnight last night watching the no-hitter game with my dad. And Feeney just kind of rolls his eyes about baseball. He was like, oh, I thought you were going to say you stayed up late to watch something worth watching, like the Nobel Prize announcements. And then Minkus starts giving like a full list of all the Nobel Prize winners, saying he stayed up all night and he's so super refreshed and he had no problems with the test. Again, proving himself to be Corey's antagonist by being able to be super smart and efficient regardless of having the lack of sleep.
Exactly. And then that's when you get the little bit about Sean and Minkus's second back and forth where Sean's like teacher's pet. Minkus is like, fix a sink. And I just love, I love how self-confident these characters are. But what's important in that scene is even Sean is surprised that he got to stay up and watch it. So even the kids kind of understand that, no, this is definitely...
It's a big deal. It's something that they wish they were able to stay up for. They're envious of Corey.
Yeah, exactly. So after this scene where I was even thinking about it when Corey was telling Feeney what he got to do, you know that that's going to come back. You know that even if like a regular class, even if your teacher didn't live next door, your teacher's going to call your parents and be like, hey, your child failed a test today, and it was because he said he was up all night with you. At least I feel like that's what my teachers would have done. So the idea that Corey just can't even see this far ahead kind of explains the next scene.
Sure, because Alan comes home from work and he says hello to Amy. He says hello to Morgan. Corey comes running down the stairs, and the first thing he says is, Dad, we blew it. I got an F on my test.
Exactly. And I'm like, first of all, we blew it. No, you blew it, and you're still blowing it. It's like a don't bring me into this type thing.
Well, he says, he's like, we blew it. I failed my test because I stayed up with you. I mean, I told Mr. Feeney that we were up late watching the ball game and the incredible no-hitter, and then he realizes that Amy's right next to him, and then just is like, oh, you know what, maybe it was just a dream.
Yeah, as we've all tried to use, it's like, oh, maybe I was thinking about the other person. I don't know, not us, not you, Dad. And I think of course Amy gets mad, as she would, as any parent would, that he was up that late, and she tells him to fix it, and until you do, talking to Alan, until you do, you're grounded. And Corey's like, can she do that? And Alan goes, in certain ways, yeah, she can.
And this is something I wanted to bring up to you because I feel like there's not a lot of sitcoms where the adult parents have like a clear sexual relationship. And I feel like I can probably think of just a handful that like you felt that there was a real kind of like romance outside of their roles as parents. I don't know. Did you ever get that vibe?
Well, I disagree, but I think that's because almost all other sitcoms at this time are about unconventional parents. You know what I mean? Or it's just like I
don't know. I just felt like there was times where like Aunt Viv would like try to like take Uncle Phil to the hot tub, and like there would be times where like Claire and Cliff would be in bed with like their pajamas and they'd be super flirty, and I don't know. I think it's a rare thing, but a good thing that they show that Amy and Alan have this relationship where they're not just parents; they're also man and wife.
I will give you that. I will definitely say that I'm watching in the last 3 episodes that we've watched, it is very clear that Amy and Alan have their own storyline that we may not be privy to, but like they have their own things going on, and that's good writing. Those are good characters. And also one of the things that I wrote down, I was like, we've talked about this often. Alan is hardworking. He's busy all the time. Sex is probably one of the very few pleasures in life that he has. Like,
I wish Alan had a little bit more flaws, I guess, in a way. It seems like he's without flaws, other than like him keeping Corey up late seems to be a flaw, but there's still this question of whether or not that was even a bad idea. So I'm trying to figure out what his flaw is, because he seems to be this like they said in the last episode, this Superman, this perfect guy.
Well, I also feel like I'm forgiving of that because this is our third episode in. And I think that I'm not really sure how much we dive into Alan as a character, even as the series goes on. But right now, Alan, all we need to know about Alan is that he works hard and he tries to be involved with his kids. And I think that's like the purpose of his character right now.
Well, going back to our fan theory from the first podcast about how Corey, these characters evolve as Corey sees them, he only sees his dad as his dad. So maybe, again, Alan does have a more complex personality, but we don't know that because Corey doesn't know it.
Yeah, and actually, that fits, especially for what we're about to go into. So Alan, of course, goes to fix it, and he walks to the backyard, and he tries to talk to Feeney, which, again, it's kind of really convenient to have your kid's teacher next door. Well, can be, depending on how you see it. He goes to the backyard, and Corey kind of pits Alan against George. This is like where he's playing the two guys off of each other.
Yeah, well, I mean, Feeney basically says to him, like, Alan says to him, hey, George, it's totally my fault for the reason why Corey wasn't able to, why he fell asleep in class. Is there any way you can give him a makeup? It wasn't his fault. It was my fault. Can you help me out? And, Feeney's like, I understand. I'm not going to give him a makeup test. And Alan's like, I'm confused. You just told me you understand. And he's like, well, there's a difference between understanding and condoning. And, I have been an educator for this long, and I can't make exceptions for every student, blah, blah, blah. This is just how it is. And it kind of just ends in this way where it feels like there's a little bit of tension between Feeney and Alan. So,
yeah, like to dive into that more, what happens is he goes, are you going to fail a kid because his father tried to spend time with him? And Feeney goes, I've heard every excuse of someone failing, and what would be my excuse if I failed? And then that's when Alan kind of sends Corey away, and like Corey doesn't really get where it's going. He just knows that like adults are talking now, but as the audience, we get that it's about to take a little bit serious of a turn. And Alan goes, I don't understand why you're making a big deal out of this. I really thought you understood that my job has me away. And then Alan says something where I was like, ooh, low blow. He goes,
yeah, it does get kind of low blowish when he brings up,
if you had a son, you would understand why, but you don't. And I was like, dude, that's like messed up.
Yeah. And you could tell too that like Feeney's kind of hurt by it. And that's what's so great about his performance in this episode is that there's multiple times where you can tell that Feeney is upset by what he's hearing, but it's not this like outward expression of upset. It's just this really subtle, quiet look that just shows that like I was hurt by this,
which is very Feeney, by the way. Like it's the way that I think of the Feeney character is he gets upset, but even when he's upset or is yelling, he's more so trying to get a point across to you. It's when Feeney's quiet that you're like, ooh, like
yeah. Well, and Alan is getting progressively more upset, and he's like, we're hearing some of the frustrations and him complaining about things that we didn't hear about in the last episode. So he's like, I'm running in between work. I constantly have to fix the attic and all of this, and I'm just trying to find time to see my son. Like this is our first time of seeing him not be like, oh, I'll do it with a smile. He's actually showing he's a human.
Yeah.
But it does get to this point where if you had a son, you would know that, but you don't. And George just is like, well, obviously we're not going to agree to this. The conversation's over.
Yeah, well, Feeney tries to lighten the mood by saying, like, we're clearly on opposite sides of the fence here. Literally. And they like acknowledge that, and it's kind of like this lighthearted way to get out of a situation, which we've all been in, where it's just like I feel like that could turn for the worst, and so I'm gonna remove myself from this.
Sure, yeah. And Corey's watching this, and he goes up, like as Alan walks back into the house, Corey goes, "You've been fiended."
Yeah, you've been fiend. So now back in the kitchen, Amy asks how it goes, and this is what Corey's like, we failed, but because Feeney is a butt. And Alan immediately understands what he's done, and he kind of switches over and he's like, don't call your teacher a butt. Good teachers are rare, and Feeney is a great teacher, showing that he does understand and he wants Corey to respect Feeney.
Which is just nice. It's nice just to show that they're just good people. And you believe that Corey ends up being a good person because you see Alan and Amy being good people and teaching their kids to be great people.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. It's actually, thinking about it, I mean, I don't know. I'm not a teacher, but I just hear very often that just may not be where everyone's at now. Like, I feel like the theme is parents versus teachers as of late. Like, I don't know.
Totally. I mean, my wife is a teacher, and she always felt that like there were parents who would believe the student over the teacher, which when I was a kid never happened.
Exactly. And this is when it harks back to me as well. It's like, no, your teacher deserves just as much respect because your teacher is an adult, and their job is hard, and there's some value placed on that within the home. And I think that's great that Alan, even though he's upset with Feeney, takes this time to be like, you need to respect your teacher.
And he does. What he says is he's like, you know what? He's like, in so many words, I don't like the way you spoke about Mr. Feeney. Don't do it again. But why don't you go upstairs, grab your baseball stuff, and we'll go down to the Y and we'll hit some balls at the batting cage. So you're seeing that like he's like, hey, I don't like that you did that, but now that I've made that clear, let's go spend some time together and hang out, which I thought was nice.
Exactly. And then so as soon as Corey does go to get dressed, Alan turns to Amy and is like, Feeney's a butt. It's like you have what you wanted to say to your kid and the message that you have to get through, but the moment that your kid's out of range, you're just like, all right, now let's really talk about this.
Well, and Alan kind of says, he's like, Feeney's out there making all these good points, and like he knows, he's like, I was in the wrong for this. I know I'm in the wrong for this, and I feel bad about it. And he doesn't really know what to say or what to do at this point.
So what I really like about this is in this scene, we get Amy who comes in and she says, I know why you did what you did, and I love you for it, but you can't jerk his life around just to make up for your schedule. And again, that's a good lesson that we all should have, like, when it comes to... Yeah,
I felt like that was a very, like, high-level concept that they were trying to introduce into a kid's show.
Yeah, again, I was like, oh, I could use that advice for myself. It's like, you are trying to make up for something, but you can't just adjust everyone else's schedule because you feel bad about a plan you canceled.
Sure. Yeah. What this really comes down to is that if George makes a promise to Corey, he either needs to do it or he needs to make up for it in a time that's not the middle of the night. Like, yeah. I that's kind of where we're kind of getting to for was this a good choice or not?
Yeah. Yeah. And doorbell rings and it's Lenny.
Well, introducing himself to Eric.
Yeah.
Who works at the store with Lenny.
Exactly. I know. It's we do that little bit where Lenny's introducing himself. We go to the kitchen again and sorry to disturb you after hours, but there's a problem at the store. Alan's like, there's always a problem at the store.
Well, they're making out too, which is, again, harkens back to their relationship being great.
Oh yeah, that's actually true. And that it even kind of startles Lenny. He's like, "Oh, I'm sorry that
sorry to interrupt while you're giving mouth to mouth."
Yeah, exactly. Which is probably what he calls it. Which I don't know. Lenny kind of seems to live a sad life in this little bit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Alan kind of like he's at this point where he's like, Lenny, you're an assistant manager, right? Do you know what an assistant manager does? They take care of things while the manager's not around. You're the assistant manager. I want you to take care of this. And then Lenny, in so many words, kind of like, oh yeah, I guess you're right. There's with the fire, there's not going to be a store to manage anyway, or something. Well, yeah,
yeah. So what he says, and this is what's really funny to me, is he goes, Lenny, do you know why they have assistant managers? And he goes, no. And I'm like, all right, how'd you get this job? Like, how did you get the assistant manager position if you can't, like, assistant managers are usually the most competent person outside of the manager. So
yeah.
What's going down at that store?
Yeah, it just seems that, like, I don't know. He's a little too dumb.
Yeah.
Lenny's a kind of a dumb character. I'm not a fan of Lenny.
I'm not a fan of Lenny, which is kind of like what I was waiting to say earlier when I first asked you what you thought of him. I was like, I hate Lenny. Like everything about Lenny.
Yeah. Well, it feels like a different show. He's ruining the vibe.
Yeah. Corey comes downstairs. They're ready to go play tennis, which is what Alan told Corey to get ready for. And that's when Lenny reveals that there has been a fire. Of course, this means Alan has to go. He apologizes to Corey again. And at this point in time, Corey's just like, don't worry about it. Yeah.
And he even says, like, Dad, you don't have to, like, wake me up in the middle of the night just because you canceled on me. It's fine. We can, like, do it another time.
Exactly. And I think this is even where Alan's like, I feel like I failed you. Like, I'm not doing my job as a dad.
Well, I mean, there's also that really funny moment where Lenny's going to leave and then Morgan walks in and then he introduces himself to Morgan and Morgan goes, Lenny, we've been through this.
Yeah, no, there's that. But as I was saying with the Alan feeling like he failed, we get this little touching moment right before Alan leaves to go to work where he's kind of like, if it was up to me, you wouldn't go to school, I wouldn't go to work, and we would just hang out all the time. And Corey's like, why don't we do that? And he goes, well, the family's gotten used to eating, which is pretty much why, like, any adult does what they do. It's the fact that you need to...
Yeah, exactly. And, well, what Alan ends up doing is saying that I was wrong and Feeney was right.
Yeah. He says Feeney did the right thing.
And so Corey's kind of in the spot where he's like, wow, my dad was wrong. And, what does that mean for me? And, this is maybe his first time having an adult say that an adult did something that was a bad choice. And it feels like Corey doesn't really know what to do with it.
Well, yeah, because the next thing we see, Corey's kind of just outside or near outside, he's not fully outside, playing with his tennis ball by himself, and the ball goes over the fence.
Oh, I roll on this whole thing because the way they set this up is that the tennis ball goes in the Feeney's yard and Corey sneaks in. He doesn't want to interrupt Feeney and he's walking through and then all of a sudden a light shines on Corey and we see that Feeney is sitting in 2 lawn chairs right out in the open. How did Corey not see Feeney?
Well, yeah, there's that. And then also I was going to say, I have some thoughts about this and like we'll get into it in just a minute, but like, why is Feeney outside doing this? Like if everything that Feeney says is true, what it really means to me and what this scene sets up is that Feeney wanted Corey to come join him. It's like why?
And you know what? I would disagree with that, but I think the apple juice kind of rings true to what you're talking about.
Exactly.
Because why else would he have a Scotch bottle filled with apple juice ready to go?
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. It's like he has 2 seats. He's outside. And
what we gather is that he's clearly been reflecting.
Yeah. And I think that, to me, I feel that maybe something that they do very often is that George can, in fact, hear what goes on inside the Matthews house. And in my theory, anyway, is that Feeney heard Alan cancel again and kind of took that to heart and understood how valuable that the moment last night was.
I disagree. I don't know if it's that. I think that George is just he's thinking about the argument he had with Alan earlier, and it's just making him think like, you know what, if I had a kid, would I make that same choice? Because in the conversation that George has with Corey after they sit down with their apple juice, you hear Feeney start talking about, I had my experiences with my father, and, when I was a kid, I wanted to stay up and hear President Truman announce that the war was going to end, and my dad didn't let me stay up, and, it's important for a son to spend time with their father. And Corey says, how do you know that if you never spent time with your dad? And he goes, that's exactly how I know.
Feeney has been sitting in the dark, and he talks about the time when he was a boy and there was a war going on, and you had, he had to get like rations of butter, and like you couldn't just get like even sneakers were made out of like what was it? Like he couldn't get new sneakers because they were made out of tires, and it would
sure
and stuff like that. And so this war was really, really affecting his childhood. So many things Feeney couldn't do as a kid because of this war that he just heard about going on. And then later on, he hears that the war is coming to an end and that they're going to announce it. And that is, to be honest, that's a pretty big moment. Not even for a child, but just in general. If there's some far off force that's constantly interfering with your happiness, and then you hear it's going to come to an end, that's a pretty big moment. And I understand his need. I mean, it kind of paints George as like a younger version of George, still kind of dorky. It's not like the World Series.
Well, what George says is that, my dad wanted me to go to school the next day instead of staying up late. And then he says to Corey, he's like, do you know what I learned in class that day? And Corey makes a little joke like, oh, this is a tough one. I'm sure this is like only going to be a test question or something. And then Corey, he's like, I don't know, Mr. Feeney. I don't know what you learned that day. And Feeney goes, neither do I. And he starts talking about how education isn't about like specific test scores. It's about the overall effect. And, he doesn't remember who he learned that day, but he does remember that he didn't get to spend time with his dad or stay up late, and how that specific circumstance was a more important thing for him than going to school.
Well, yeah, Feeney even says that how Feeney explains it is that his dad didn't want him around his drinking buddies. Which is a very interesting dynamic to point out.
I think it makes sense with George's character to believe that he had a dad that was maybe a little cold.
Oh yeah, completely. Not only that, his father was a little cold, which I agree with, but just George's relationship with his family, because George and himself, like, we hear about his sister, but even in this, he goes, you would think that my sister would know that I don't drink this, this much, that I would get this set. It kind of shows that Feeney not only doesn't have children of his own, but Feeney just doesn't have a family dynamic that he's as close with, which
is why he invests so much into his students and so much into Corey and Sean and everyone else.
Which is also why I think something like Alan's statement earlier of if you had a kid, you would understand. It burns. It's like yeah.
Because George doesn't have a great family and family life, and also he dedicates his entire life to all these kids, and he kind of, in his own way, feels as if they're his kids too.
Yeah, exactly. So then Alan comes home and he says it's time for bed and sends kind of Corey in, and Corey asked, "Are we going to study that great European sneaker war?" Well, which I loved, and Feeney was like, "Yeah, I'm sure we'll get to it." And what does he say? Yeah.
Well,
go ahead.
As Alan and Feeney are kind of like, Corey he goes to bed, and Alan says to Feeney, like, "I just want you to know I'm gonna have him in bed early tonight." And Feeney's like, "Well, I want you to know that if I did have a son and an opportunity presented itself for me to, wake him up to watch a baseball game or to listen to the president on the radio or to do literally anything at all, I would probably do it as well." So you get this thing of like, no one really knows what was the right thing to do.
Well, I think how I saw that, and I wanted to ask you this question following up, but how I saw it is, first of all, this is the first time these two men have seen each other since the argument, which is, there's always that like awkward moment of having to see someone that you just disagreed with very openly.
Although I will say, I didn't feel any like heated tension. I felt like they were just kind of neighbors, just kind of coming back like, yeah, we had this fight, but there's still respect.
I didn't feel heated tension, but I definitely did feel, or at least it's played to me as a very awkward moment. It is
sure.
It's like again, it's the wound is still open, is how I see it.
Well, what I think is interesting about both characters is that neither one was like, oh, I can't believe this person said this to me. I'm right, he's wrong. Both characters were like, you know what? I think I'm wrong on this. I think I need to check myself.
Exactly. And I was going to say, do you think from Feeney's last statement, do you think that Feeney regrets not having kids? Like, do you think that's like even something that's...
I don't know if he regrets not having kids, but I think that he regrets not having maybe a family of his own of some kind. Maybe not kids specifically, but just, I don't know. You do get this idea that like when he's like, oh, if I had the opportunity to wake up a kid for any reason at all. But that's not something I feel is consistent with his character. It's
Well, I also feel like, I mean, you're right in the sense of consistency with the character, but I think that when I saw this, it was definitely that line of like, for any reason at all, that I was like, oh, is there?
Yeah, you get a vibe of it that he's unhappy with the choices that he made.
And even if it's just for this moment, I think, especially since we did come in on Feeney just kind of contemplating everything, I think this situation was a moment for him to really think about where he is in his life.
Well, he is a widower. So I don't know how much of that is playing into this as far as just like having someone to wake up, to watch something important. It could just be part of that, because we do later on learn that he did have a wife that passed.
But that's good. At this point in time, we don't know that. And when I think about it, we don't really know that much about Feeney. We've heard about his sister twice now. And then we hear about his father, but we don't really get a sense of Feeney other than this wise older neighbor, which again, if we're going with our fan theory of like, we learn as Corey learns, but there's definitely, I think this started opening up the question of like, who is George Feeney?
Well, I think also too, because of our fan theory of we know what Corey knows, I think because George does such a good job at keeping a professional distance between himself and Corey, that's the reason why we don't learn a ton about Feeney's personal life, because Feeney keeps that very guarded, very private, separate from the kids. Even though he does have this very almost personal relationship with them, there's still a separation there.
Yeah, that's true. So final scene is Corey's in bed and Amy comes in to say goodnight. And Corey's like, can I ask you a question? And he goes, earlier Dad said that Feeney was right. Then Feeney said that Dad was right. At least that's what I think he was trying to say. He goes, it takes me a while to get on his...
Well, he says, he was like, at least that's what I think Feeney said. I usually can't hold my breath long enough to go where he likes to swim.
Yeah, exactly.
Like that.
Yeah, exactly. He goes, but how come Amy goes, two adults can sometimes see things from a different point of view and both be right. Which again, I like, because what she's saying is she didn't say that any person was wrong. She said that both of them had a different point of view and they were both right.
And I think it's just this thing of just like a kid learning that there isn't always an easy right or wrong answer. That there are these gray middle grounds. There are these kind of ethical times where you don't really know for sure what's right and what's wrong. No one ever actually finally comes to the conclusion that this was the right way to handle the situation. It's left ambiguous, and Corey's left confused from it. And he's like, well, they can be both right. How come I'm always wrong?
Yeah,
he
exactly.
Doesn't understand, and he's kind of getting, you can tell he's just, this confusion is something that kids would experience as they start to learn more about more complex adult issues.
Yeah, and I think if on that, it's like we start this series off with Corey asking a lot of questions about adult dynamics. And I mean, if this story, which it is a coming of age tale, I think that's a very important part of learning, is asking those questions and understanding the ambiguity between, that it is possible to have several perspectives on one issue.
Sure. And so, Alan and Amy, they come in, they kiss him goodnight. Alan looks at Amy. He's like, hey, am I still grounded or what's good? Like,
exactly.
Hit it. What's up?
So before we get there, but because I want to hit on this point, he goes, I'll see you tomorrow. And Corey goes, tomorrow, what if there's like a no-hitter? What if the president wants to speak?
Oh, yeah.
And Alan goes, it can wait till tomorrow because your dad will always be here to tell you about it, which is, I mean, like, it's a little TGIF, but it's also very Boy Meets World and very much a, look, I know that we had this entire thing that we just went through and you don't know who's right and who's wrong, but the only thing that matters is that I'm here for you.
Sure. And this whole thing of just like, hey, if something important happens, like, I don't know if I'll make the decision to wake you up for it, but don't worry, like, I'll at least talk to you about it. I'm going to make time for you is what he's saying.
Exactly, which is a great way of handling that whole thing. And then we get to the whole, am I still grounded? And we'll talk about it. And Alan's like, talk.
And then Corey goes like, he won't be back tonight.
Exactly.
He knows his parents are going to be doing it. He's like happy about it. What?
He doesn't know what it is, but he definitely knows that Alan will be preoccupied.
That's interesting. You know what's so funny is to think that 11-year-old Corey made like a sexual reference, because Corey's one of the most like asexual characters. So like at least up until like 15 or 16. And so it's just interesting to see him make that connection in like a joyful way.
Exactly. Again, I feel like it's very, very much for the audience type closer. But I loved it. So let's go into our Feeney Taught Me, where we discuss the moral of the episode. Where you at? What you got?
I think the moral of the episode, and again, because this isn't a whole episode about morals and ethics, it's hard to know what the right thing to do was, but I think that the lesson was, there might not always be a right answer, but there is a right way to handle these situations. And I feel that by looking at the examples set by Alan and Feeney about how they were able to just kind of say, you know what, I may have been wrong about a few issues. You may have been right about a few things. Let's just agree to disagree. I felt like that they were showing Corey how to go about handling this without outright saying it. Yeah. So I think that's the lesson to take away.
Yeah, I wrote the moral I got from this was like, in a world full of responsibilities, it's important to respect the responsibilities of others. You know, there's a very big part about respecting Corey's time and Feeney's position, and Corey respecting his parents and his teacher. I think just respect of each other is the takeaway of this. But then also that quality time is just as important as for growth as education is.
Sure.
And I think that's kind of, again, there's no one is more than the other, because they're kind of weighted equally. It's like a quality time with family or education. It's like you can't really choose. You need both in your life, and both are equally important. And so that's what I got from it.
Sure.
All right. Do you have a grade for this?
Being honest, bro, I think I'm gonna give it a C+.
C+, really? That low?
I need to just remember. I just feel like I'm coming out the bat, like, give it kind of feeling really just excited just to be having the podcast and watching the show, that I'm grading a little higher than I should, because I know that there are better episodes, and I don't want to give like this one a B and then we get to like a better episode and it's like, well, do I give this an A++? Like, what do I do at that point? So just trying to keep things in perspective, and mostly because of Lenny, I'm going to give this episode a C+.
So it's so funny you wrote that. I'm kind of doing the opposite, where it's like to me, I'm like, I enjoyed this, A+, but like, and then later episodes that I love, I don't know, I'll have to like invent a letter to show how much.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, I don't think C is a bad grade, because Corey is a C student, as we know. but I think that at least, and you'll probably recognize this too, that this episode and the last episode were home-based episodes, not really school-based episodes. And I feel the show shines more when it's school-based and not home-based.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I was going to say that I, too, gave the episode demerits because of Lenny. It was literally because of Lenny that I was like, you know what? As much as I loved the message and I loved everything about this, Lenny brought you down a letter grade. So I
think Lenny shows up in at least another episode, if not 2 other episodes. So, I mean, he's at least in this season, we'll see Lenny again doing his whole Lenny thing.
You're going to give it a C+, you said?
Yeah, I'm gonna go C+. What are you giving it, bro?
I'm giving it a B. I'm just giving it a solid B.
Give it a B, bruh.
Everything that we talked about, I'm just going to give it a B, and we'll see. But the next episode, we are introduced to...
Oh, my God. The next episode is, guys, if you're watching the show and you're like, oh, maybe you're just listening to the podcast, like, you could start this whole thing with the next season 1, episode 4. Just start the show that way. Because
this is actually one of the more memorable episodes that we are going to talk about.
Of the series.
Yeah.
Of the whole series.
A lot of I guess you could say like the storylines or whatever are pulled from this episode.
I think that the next episode is where they figure out just what they want to do with the show. It seems like the first few episodes, like they had a pretty solid pilot. The next 2 episodes were like, okay, these are decent TGIF shows. But once you bring it to Panga and once you have this like Corey whole, I don't want to get into it. Just
yeah, what I say.
Next episode's going to be great.
We're talking about it and we haven't even gotten into it. All right. So thank you for listening to Bruh Meets World. Make sure to follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Email us at bruhmeetsworld@gmail.com. You can find me on Twitter at Extra Siege. That's XTRACEEJ. TC.
You can find me on Twitter at Anna Kendrick RT, which is Anna Kendrick retweets. I simply just retweet whatever Anna Kendrick tweets. I also am on Instagram at A Braver Me. You can follow me there. It's all fitness stuff, but if you want to check that out, feel free to.
All right, so thank you guys for joining us. Remember to dream, try, and do good.
Dream, try, do good, guys.
Later.
Later.